I was standing in my kitchen, preparing what I thought would be a quiet, traditional Christmas dinner for our family, when my husband walked in with a smile that made my blood run cold. "Honey," he said casually, stirring his coffee, "my ex-wife is joining us for Christmas dinner this year. My name is Evelyn, and at 53 years old, I thought I had seen every possible curveball life could throw at a marriage. 27 years I'd been with Robert. 27 years of building a life together, raising our 2 daughters, creating traditions, weathering storms. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared me for those words on that December morning. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further." I stood there, my hand frozen on the potato peeler, feeling the cold metal press into my palm. The morning light streamed through the kitchen window, hitting the ceramic snowmen I'd arranged on the windowsill just days before, their painted smiles suddenly seeming cruel and mocking. "Excuse me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Robert didn't even look up from his newspaper. He just nodded, as if he'd asked me to pass the salt, as if he'd suggested we try a different brand of coffee, as if this were the most normal thing in the world. "Yeah, Linda's going through a tough time. Her sister died last month, and she'll be alone for the holidays. I figured it would be the Christian thing to do, to invite her over." The Christian thing to do. Those words echoed in my mind like a hammer striking an anvil, each repetition sending shock waves through my entire body. Something about his tone, about the way he avoided my eyes, about the casual certainty with which he delivered this news, sent ice water through my veins. This wasn't a suggestion. This wasn't a request. This was a declaration, a decision already made, already set in stone, presented to me as a courtesy rather than something we'd discuss as partners. The potato I'd been peeling slipped from my other hand and thudded into the sink, but I barely heard it over the rushing sound in my ears. Let me tell you about Linda. She wasn't just Robert's ex-wife. She was the woman he'd left 30 years ago, before we even met. They'd been married for only 2 years in their early 20s, and according to Robert, it had been a youthful mistake that ended amicably. He rarely spoke of her. In nearly 3 decades together, I could count on one hand the times her name had come up in conversation. She was a ghost from his past, a footnote in the story of his life before me, a shadow so faint I'd never even considered it might still hold substance. And now suddenly she was coming to Christmas dinner. To our home. To our family's most sacred holiday. To the table where I'd fed our children, celebrated our anniversaries, mourned the loss of my parents. "Robert," I said, setting down the peeler with deliberate care, my movements slow and controlled because I was afraid if I moved too quickly, I might shatter like the crystal wine glasses we kept in the cabinet behind me. "Don't you think you should have discussed this with me first? Before inviting someone into our home for the most important family holiday of the year?" He finally looked up, and I saw something flicker in his eyes. Annoyance? Guilt? Defensiveness? I couldn't tell. The man I'd slept beside for nearly 3 decades suddenly seemed like a stranger, his expression unreadable, his body language closed off. "Evelyn, don't be dramatic. It's just dinner. She's a lonely woman who needs some kindness. I thought you'd understand. You've always been so compassionate, so generous with others. Why would this be any different? Just dinner." The words felt like a slap, sharp and stinging across my face. In our entire marriage, Robert had never made a major decision without consulting me. We were partners, or so I'd believed. We discussed everything from paint colors to career moves to how to handle our daughter's teenage rebellions. We'd built a life on mutual respect and consideration. But this unilateral declaration, this dismissal of my feelings as dramatic, it felt like standing on solid ground and suddenly discovering it was nothing but ice, thin and treacherous, ready to crack beneath my feet at any moment. I turned back to the sink, gripping the edge of the counter so hard my knuckles went white. "Fine," I heard myself say, my voice flat and distant, as if it belonged to someone else entirely. "If that's what you want." I didn't trust myself to say more. Didn't trust myself to look at him. Because if I did, if I let myself truly see what was happening, I might have broken down right there, and I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. I had potatoes to peel and a turkey to prepare and the facade of normalcy to maintain, at least for a little while longer. The next few days passed in a strange fog. I went through the motions of Christmas preparation, baking cookies that filled the house with the scent of cinnamon and vanilla, wrapping gifts in paper printed with cheerful reindeer and snowflakes, decorating the tree with our daughters Emma and Claire, who were coming home from college for the holidays. But my mind was elsewhere, circling around that conversation like a vulture over carrion. Why now? Why, after 30 years of silence, was Linda suddenly back in Robert's life? And more importantly, why did he seem so determined to bring her into ours? What had changed? What invisible shift had occurred in the landscape of our marriage that I'd been too blind or too comfortable or too trusting to notice? I tried to talk to him again that evening as we lay in bed. The darkness felt oppressive, heavy with words unsaid and questions unasked. Robert, I need to understand this. Why is it so important to you that Linda comes for Christmas? He sighed, the kind of sigh that suggested I was being unreasonable, that I was making a mountain out of a molehill, that I was the problem here rather than his inexplicable insistence on inviting his ex-wife to our family holiday. She's had a hard year, Evelyn. Her sister was the only family she had left. What kind of person would I be if I turned my back on her now? What would that say about me, about us, about the values we've tried to instill in our daughters? I wanted to say, what kind of husband invites his ex-wife to Christmas without even asking his current wife? What kind of man prioritizes the feelings of someone from his distant past over the comfort and security of the woman he's been with for 3 decades? But I swallowed those words. They felt too sharp, too accusatory, and some part of me was still clinging to the hope that this was innocent, that I was overreacting, that there was a reasonable explanation I just hadn't found yet. Instead, I said, "Have you been in touch with her this whole time?" The pause before his answer told me everything I needed to know. It stretched out between us like a chasm, dark and seemingly bottomless. We reconnected on Facebook a few months ago. It's nothing, just old friends catching up. People do it all the time, Evelyn. It doesn't mean anything. But the way he said it, too quickly, too defensively, told me it meant something. It meant everything. Few months. He'd been talking to his ex-wife for months, and he'd never mentioned it. Not once. Not casually over dinner, not during our evening walks, not during the countless hours we spent together. I lay there in the darkness, listening to his breathing steady into sleep, while my own mind raced like a hamster on a wheel, spinning through possibilities and explanations and fears. Something was wrong. Every instinct I had, every intuition honed over decades of knowing this man, of reading his moods and his silences, of understanding the subtle shifts in his behavior, was screaming at me. But I didn't have proof. I had nothing but a feeling, a terrible, gnawing feeling that the life I'd built was constructed on sand, and the tide was coming in. The next morning, I did something I never thought I would do. I went through Robert's phone. My hands shook as I waited for him to get in the shower, my heart pounding so hard I thought I might faint, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. I'd never invaded his privacy before, never felt the need. Trust had been the foundation of our marriage, or so I'd thought. But desperation makes us do things we never imagined. Desperation turns us into people we don't recognize. People who sneak and spy and violate boundaries we once held sacred. I scrolled through his messages and there she was. Linda. Hundreds of messages between them going back 6 months. My vision blurred as I read them, my eyes struggling to focus on the words that were destroying everything I believed about my marriage. They weren't explicitly romantic, not exactly, but the intimacy was unmistakable. The familiarity, the easy affection. "Can't wait to see you again," one read. "Talking to you is the best part of my day," said another. And then, buried in a conversation from 3 weeks ago, one that made my stomach drop like a stone into dark water. "I've missed you for 30 years. I'm not wasting any more time." I heard the shower turn off and quickly replaced the phone, my hands trembling so badly I nearly dropped it. When Robert came out, toweling his hair, water droplets still clinging to his shoulders, I was sitting on the bed, trying to look normal, trying to breathe, trying to hold myself together. "You okay?" he asked, and I nodded, not trusting my voice. Because if I spoke, I would scream. If I opened my mouth, everything would come pouring out. All the rage and hurt and betrayal, and I wasn't ready. Not yet. I needed to think. I needed to plan. I needed to understand the full scope of what was happening before I could decide how to respond. Over the next week, I became a detective in my own life. I watched Robert more carefully than I ever had before, studying him the way I might study a stranger. I noticed the way he smiled at his phone when he thought I wasn't looking, a soft, secretive smile I hadn't seen in years. I saw him slip out to make calls, claiming it was work, but his voice on those calls was different, warm and intimate, the way he used to talk to me in the early years of our marriage. I checked our bank statements and found regular withdrawals of cash that he couldn't account for. 200 here, 300 there. Where was that money going? What was he buying that he couldn't put on our joint credit card? What secrets was he keeping that required cash transactions, untraceable and hidden? I also started paying attention to the smaller things, the details I'd overlooked or dismissed before. The way he'd started dressing better, wearing cologne more often, spending extra time in front of the mirror in the mornings. The way he'd become suddenly interested in his appearance, joining a gym, buying new clothes, caring about things he'd ignored for years. The way he'd become more distant with me, less interested in conversation, less present even when we were in the same room. He was there physically, but emotionally, mentally, he was somewhere else. With someone else. And then came the day that changed everything. It was December 20th, 5 days before Christmas. Robert said he had to run to the office to finish up some year-end reports. He kissed my cheek, a perfunctory gesture that felt more like habit than affection, grabbed his briefcase and left. Something in my gut told me to follow him. Call it intuition, call it desperation, call it the accumulated weight of all those little suspicions and observations crystallizing into certainty. I waited 5 minutes, my hands gripping the steering wheel of my car, my heart hammering against my ribs like it was trying to escape my chest. I know it sounds like something from a movie, like the kind of melodrama we watch and judge and think would never happen to us. But I swear to you, every word of this is true. I followed him through town, staying several cars back, praying he wouldn't notice me, praying I was wrong, praying that he really was going to the office and I was just a paranoid wife who'd worked herself into an irrational state. He didn't go to his office. He drove across town to a small cafe I'd never heard of. A quaint little place with lace curtains and flower boxes, the kind of romantic spot young couples go for first dates, parked and went inside. Through the window, I watched him sit down at a table where a woman was already waiting. Linda. I'd seen her picture on Facebook, studied her profile the way you study an enemy, trying to understand what she had that I didn't. She was beautiful in that effortlessly elegant way some women are, with silver-streaked hair that looked intentional rather than aged, high cheekbones, and a smile that lit up her whole face when she saw him. She was wearing a soft cream sweater that probably cost more than my winter coat, and pearl earrings that caught the light. She looked polished, put together, the kind of woman who belonged in magazine spreads about aging gracefully. I sat in my car across the street, watching them through the cafe window like I was watching a movie about someone else's life. They talked for 2 hours. 2 whole hours while I sat there, my car growing cold, my coffee from the drive-through turning bitter and lukewarm. I saw him reach across the table and take her hand. I saw her lean in close, whispering something that made him laugh, really laugh, his head thrown back, his whole body relaxed in a way it never was at home anymore. I saw them sharing a piece of cake, feeding each other bites like teenagers, oblivious to everyone around them. The Robert the First was watching was different from the man I lived with. He was animated, joyful, young somehow, as if the years and responsibilities had been stripped away and he was that 22-year-old boy again, the one who'd fallen in love with her before life got complicated. And I realized with a pain that took my breath away, with a clarity that was almost physically painful, this was the Robert she remembered. The Robert from 30 years ago, before mortgages and children and the slow accumulation of resentments and routines that can drain the life from a marriage. He was reaching back, trying to recapture something he thought he'd lost. And in doing so, he was throwing away everything we'd built together. Everything we were. Everything I thought we meant to each other. When they finally stood to leave, they embraced. Not a friendly hug, not a casual goodbye, but a long lingering embrace that spoke of promises and possibilities. He held her like she was precious, like she was fragile, like she was everything. His arms wrapped around her completely, his face buried in her hair, and even from across the street I could see the tenderness in the gesture. I could see that this was a man in love, or at least a man who believed he was in love, who had convinced himself that this was real and right and worth risking everything for. I drove home in a daze, my eyes dry, my mind strangely clear. The shock had burned away. leaving something harder behind. I wasn't just hurt anymore. I was angry. And more than that, I was determined. This wasn't going to end with me as the victim, the wronged wife, the woman who'd been cast aside for a ghost from the past. If you like the story, hit the like button. Because what I did next, well, you might think I was crazy. Or you might think I was brilliant. Either way, I need you to keep listening. I didn't confront Robert when he came home. His cheeks flushed from the cold, from the afternoon spent with her. Instead, I smiled and asked about his day at the office. He lied smoothly, effortlessly, talking about reports and meetings and boring administrative tasks, weaving a fiction so complete and detailed that I almost believed him myself. Almost. I nodded along, asking questions, playing the part of the supportive wife, the trusting partner, the woman who had no idea her world was crumbling. All the while I was thinking, planning, calculating my next move like a chess player 3 steps ahead of her opponent. See, I realized something important in that moment. If I confronted him now, he would deny it. He would gaslight me, tell me I was imagining things, that I was being paranoid, that I was misinterpreting an innocent friendship. Men like Robert, good men who convince themselves they're doing nothing wrong, they're experts at self-deception. They can look you in the eye and lie with complete sincerity because they've already lied to themselves so thoroughly that they believe their own fiction. And if I accused him without undeniable proof, without witnesses, without incontrovertible evidence, I would be the villain in this story. The jealous wife. The unreasonable woman who couldn't handle her husband showing kindness to an old friend. The shrew who ruined Christmas with her suspicions and accusations. No, I needed to be smarter than that. I needed to let this play out. I needed to give him enough rope to hang himself with, to let him make his choices in full view of everyone who mattered. And Christmas dinner, with Linda sitting at our table, with our daughters as witnesses, would be the perfect stage. It would be the moment of truth, the unveiling, the reckoning. I would let him show his true colors in front of the people whose opinions he valued most, and then there would be no denying it, no explaining it away, no rewriting the narrative to make himself the victim. Over the next few days, I threw myself into preparation with a manic energy that surprised even me. I cooked Robert's favorite dishes, spending hours in the kitchen creating the perfect meal. Honey-glazed ham, roasted potatoes with rosemary, my grandmother's green bean casserole, homemade dinner rolls that filled the house with the scent of yeast and butter. I bought a new dress, deep burgundy silk that made me look elegant and powerful, that hugged my curves and made me feel beautiful despite everything. I set the table with our finest china, the wedding set we'd received 27 years ago and used only on the most special occasions, each piece a reminder of the vows we'd made, the promises we'd exchanged. I polished the silver until it gleamed. I arranged flowers as a centerpiece, white roses and holly, classic and beautiful. I made everything perfect. Because if this was going to be a performance, if this was going to be the grand finale of my marriage, I was going to steal the show. Christmas Eve arrived, and with it came Emma and Claire. My daughters, my beautiful girls, now young women of 25 and 23. They burst through the door with their usual energy, arms loaded with wrapped presents and overnight bags, hugging me tight, filling the house with laughter and stories from school. Emma was finishing her master's degree in psychology, studying human behavior and relationships with an intensity that sometimes worried me. Claire was working in marketing, her creativity and charm making her a natural. They were so different, my girls, but both so brilliant, so strong, so completely themselves in ways I envied. Over hot chocolate topped with whipped cream and cinnamon, gathered around the kitchen table like we'd done 1,000 times before, I told them about Linda coming to dinner. I watched their faces carefully as I explained, studying their reactions, gauging their understanding. Emma, my oldest, always the more perceptive one, always the one who could read between the lines, frowned immediately. "That's weird, Mom. Why would Dad invite his ex-wife to Christmas dinner? That's really inappropriate." Her psychology training was showing, her analytical mind already working through the implications. I shrugged, keeping my voice light, casual, as if this were just a minor inconvenience rather than the potential implosion of our family. "He says she's lonely, that she's had a hard year. Her sister died." Claire, ever the optimist, always the one who wanted to believe the best in people, smiled uncertainly. "Well, that's sweet of Dad, I guess. It's Christmas after all. Peace on earth and all that. Maybe she really is just lonely." But Emma kept watching me, And I could see the questions forming in her eyes, see her putting pieces together the way she'd been trained to do. She knew something was wrong. Daughters always know. They have some kind of radar for their mother's pain. Some invisible thread that connects them even when no words are spoken. That night I barely slept. I lay beside Robert, listening to him breathe, wondering if he was dreaming of Linda. Wondering if, in his mind, he'd already left me, already moved on to some fantasy of recapturing his youth, of correcting some perceived mistake from 30 years ago. Did I even factor into his daydreams anymore? Or had I become just the obstacle standing between him and his second chance at first love? The thoughts circled like sharks in dark water, predatory and relentless, but I didn't let them consume me. I had a plan. And tomorrow, Christmas Day, everything would come to light. The truth would be revealed, and whatever happened after that, at least I would know. At least the uncertainty would be over. Christmas morning dawned clear and cold, the kind of crystalline winter day that looks like a postcard. I woke early and started the final preparations, moving through the kitchen with the precision of a general preparing for battle. The turkey went in the oven at 6, positioned perfectly so it would be golden and moist by dinner time. The sweet potatoes were mashed with butter and brown sugar, topped with pecans and ready to be baked. I made my grandmother's green bean casserole, the one with the crispy onion topping that everyone loved, the recipe that had been passed down through 3 generations. I moved through these familiar tasks with a strange calm, like an actress preparing for the performance of her life, like a gladiator entering the arena knowing the fight would define everything that came after. Robert came down around 9, freshly showered, wearing slacks and a sweater I'd given him last Christmas. He kissed my cheek, a brief press of lips that felt more like obligation than affection, and asked if he could help. "No, honey," I said sweetly, forcing warmth into my voice. "You just relax. I've got everything under control." And I did. More than he could possibly know. More than he could possibly imagine. I was in control of this narrative now, directing the action, setting the stage, preparing for the moment when the curtain would rise and the truth would finally be revealed. Linda was due to arrive at 4. At 3:30, I went upstairs and put on my burgundy dress, the one I'd chosen so carefully. I stood in front of the full-length mirror in our bedroom, the room where Robert and I had shared 27 years of intimacy, and slowly zipped up the back. The silk felt cool against my skin, luxurious and empowering. I did my makeup carefully, taking my time with each stroke, highlighting my cheekbones with bronzer, lining my eyes with precision, applying a deep red lipstick that made me look confident and bold. I styled my hair in soft waves that framed my face, and added the pearl earrings my mother had given me on my wedding day, the one she'd worn at her own wedding 40 years before. I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked strong, determined, beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with youth and everything to do with power. This wasn't the worn-down wife who'd been peeling potatoes a week ago. This was a woman who knew her worth, who was done being invisible, who was ready to fight for her dignity even if she couldn't fight for her marriage. I took a deep breath, steadying myself, preparing for what was to come. Then I went back downstairs, my heels clicking against the hardwood floors with each deliberate step. Emma and Claire were setting the table, arranging the china plates and crystal glasses with care. They both looked up when I entered, and I saw Emma's eyes widen slightly. "Mom, you look amazing," Claire said, genuine admiration in her voice. Emma said nothing, just watched me with those analytical eyes, reading what I wasn't saying, understanding on some level that this wasn't just about looking nice for Christmas dinner. This was armor. This was war paint. This was a woman preparing for battle. Robert was pacing nervously in the living room, checking his phone every few seconds, adjusting his tie in the mirror above the mantel, smoothing his hair. I'd never seen him this anxious about a dinner guest before. Not when his boss came over, not when my parents visited, not even when we hosted Thanksgiving for 30 people. "You look nice, Dad," Emma said, and I caught the slight edge in her voice, the hint of suspicion that was growing stronger by the minute. She was watching him too now, I realized. Seeing what I'd been seeing. The nervousness. The anticipation. The way his hands trembled slightly as he straightened a picture frame that didn't need straightening. This wasn't about kindness to a lonely woman. This was about something else entirely. Something that made him look like a teenage boy waiting for his prom date. The doorbell rang at precisely 4 o'clock, and the sound seemed to echo through the house like a gunshot. Robert practically ran to answer it, nearly tripping over the Christmas tree skirt in his haste, and I followed more slowly, taking my time, making my entrance deliberately dramatic. Linda stood in the doorway, framed by the winter afternoon light, holding a bottle of wine wrapped in elegant gold paper, looking even more beautiful than she had in the cafe. She was wearing a cream-colored sweater dress that probably cost more than my entire outfit, cashmere that draped perfectly over her slender frame, and her smile was warm but also, I noticed with a sharp eye, slightly triumphant. There was victory in that smile, a kind of knowing satisfaction that made my stomach clench with rage. "Robert," she said, and the way she said his name with such familiarity, such intimacy, such possession, made something in my chest tighten until I could barely breathe. It was the tone of a woman who knew this man, who had history with him, who believed she had rights to him that superseded mine. "Linda," he said, his voice warm and tender in a way it hadn't been with me in months, maybe years, and they hugged. Right there in my foyer in front of our daughters, in the home I'd made for our family, they hugged like long-lost lovers reuniting. His arms wrapped around her waist, lingering there, and her hands rested on his shoulders with easy familiarity. I watched Emma's jaw tighten, watched her exchange a sharp glance with Claire, whose smile had completely faltered now, replaced by confusion and something that looked like dawning horror. And I thought, good. Let them see. Let everyone see. Let there be no doubt, no ambiguity, no room for excuses or explanations or rewriting history. Let this moment be witnessed and remembered exactly as it is. I stepped forward, extending my hand with deliberate formality, my smile polite but cold. "Linda, I'm Evelyn. Welcome to our home." She took my hand, her grip surprisingly strong, almost challenging, as if we were adversaries sizing each other up before a duel. "Evelyn, thank you so much for having me. Robert has told me so much about you. Has he?" I wanted to ask. "Has he told you how we met at a bookstore on a rainy Saturday, both reaching for the same dog-eared copy of a novel neither of us ended up reading? Has he told you about the first time he said he loved me, on a beach at sunset, with waves crashing and seagulls crying overhead? Has he told you about the nights I stayed up with our sick daughters, singing lullabies until my voice was hoarse? Has he told you about the way I stood by him when he lost his job and sank into depression, when I held this family together through sheer force of will? Has he told you about the 1,000 small ways I've loved him for nearly 3 decades, the ways I've sacrificed and compromised and bent myself into shapes I never intended, all for this marriage, all for this family?" But I just smiled. All good things, I hope. My voice was pleasant, conversational, giving nothing away. I was a gracious hostess welcoming a guest, nothing more, nothing less. At least that's what I wanted them to think. We moved to the living room and I served drinks. Wine for the adults, sparkling cider for tradition, though Emma asked for whiskey neat, which told me she was as tense as I was, needing something stronger to get through this evening. Linda settled into my favorite armchair, the one by the window where I liked to read in the afternoons when the light was good, and she settled into it like she belonged there, like she had every right to claim that space. Robert sat near her, too near, on the ottoman that matched the chair, his body language open and attentive in a way it hadn't been with me in years. His whole focus was on her, as if the rest of us had ceased to exist, as if his daughters and wife were just background noise to the main event of Linda's presence. They talked about old times, old friends, laughing at inside jokes that excluded the rest of us. "Remember Tommy Richardson?" Linda said, her eyes sparkling with amusement. "The way he used to play guitar on the fire escape at 2 in the morning?" Robert laughed, really laughed, throwing his head back. "God, yes. And Mrs. Chun would come out in her bathrobe and threaten to call the cops, but she never actually did. They were lost in their shared past, in a world that existed before me, before our daughters, before everything we'd built together. And with each memory they shared, each laugh they exchanged, I felt myself becoming more invisible, more irrelevant, more like a ghost in my own home. I watched my daughters exchange glances. I watched the way Robert touched Linda's arm when he laughed, casual but possessive, the gesture of someone who had the right to touch, who had permission, who had intimacy. And I waited. I sipped my wine slowly, letting them reveal themselves, letting them dig their own grave with each affectionate glance, each shared memory, each moment of connection that happened in front of us as if we didn't matter at all. Dinner was served at 5:30. I'd outdone myself and I knew it. The turkey was perfect, golden and glistening with herb butter, carved into neat slices that fanned across the serving platter. The sides were arranged beautifully, each dish a work of art, each one made with care and intention. The table looked like something from a magazine, golden and glowing with candlelight, the china gleaming, the crystal catching the light and throwing rainbows across the white tablecloth. We took our seats, Robert at the head of the table where he always sat, me at the foot, Linda to his right where Emma usually sat. Emma had noticed and wasn't happy, her face tight with suppressed anger, but she said nothing, just took the seat beside me with deliberate care. As we passed dishes and filled plates, Linda kept up a steady stream of conversation, her voice bright and cheerful, as if this were the most natural thing in the world, as if she belonged here at this table with this family. "This is so wonderful, Evelyn. You're such a talented cook. Everything looks absolutely delicious. Robert always said you were amazing in the kitchen." The compliment felt like condescension, like she was patting the head of the hired help, acknowledging my domestic skills while implying they were all I had to offer. Like I was useful but not important, skilled but not valued, a good cook but not a worthy partner. I smiled, cutting my turkey with precise movements. "Thank you, Linda. It's important to me that my family has a beautiful Christmas. Family is everything, don't you think? The bonds we build, the years we invest, the commitments we honor." I saw the subtle shift in her expression, the tightening around her eyes, the slight hardening of her smile. Message received. This was my family, my table, my life, and she was the intruder here, regardless of whatever history she and Robert shared. As we ate, Linda turned to Robert with a nostalgic smile, her eyes going soft and distant. "Do you remember our last Christmas together? We were so poor we couldn't afford a tree, so you went out and found that scraggly branch in the park, and we decorated it with popcorn strings and paper ornaments I made from magazine pages. We sang carols in our tiny apartment, just the two of us, drinking cheap wine and eating ramen because it was all we could afford." Robert laughed, his eyes distant with memory, seeing something that wasn't in this room, wasn't in this time, wasn't in this reality. "I remember. We were happy though, weren't we? Even without anything. Maybe especially without anything. Life was simpler then. Pure. Uncomplicated." The implication hung in the air like smoke, thick and choking. They'd been happy with nothing, while we, with our big house and comfortable life and all the trappings of success, were presumably not. While our marriage, with all its years and complications and responsibilities, was something less than that pure young love they'd shared. Claire looked uncomfortable, shifting in her seat, her eyes darting between her father and me. Emma looked angry, her knuckles white where she gripped her fork, and I felt something inside me snap into place, like a puzzle piece finding its home. It was time. I set down my fork with deliberate care, the soft clink of silver against china somehow loud in the sudden tension. "That sounds lovely," I said, my voice pleasant but with an edge sharp enough to cut. "Young love is like that, isn't it? Everything seems perfect when you're 22 and don't know any better. When you haven't faced real challenges yet. When you haven't had to deal with sick children and lost jobs and aging parents and all the thousand ways life tests you." Linda's smile froze on her face, becoming a rictus rather than an expression of joy. Robert looked at me sharply, warning in his eyes. "Evelyn, what's that supposed to mean?" I took a sip of wine, letting the moment stretch, letting the tension build. "Oh, nothing. Just that sometimes we romanticize the past. We remember the passion and forget the reasons things ended. The immaturity, the incompatibility, the fact that some relationships are meant to stay in the past, like old photographs in a dusty album, nice to look at occasionally but not something you can actually return to." The table went silent. The cheerful facade cracked and fell away, revealing the truth beneath. Linda's face had gone pale, spots of color high on her cheekbones. Robert's had gone red, his jaw clenching. "Evelyn, I don't think," he started, his voice tight with warning, but I held up my hand. "No, Robert, let me finish. Because I think it's time we were all honest here. Completely, brutally honest. No more pretending, no more polite fictions, no more dancing around what everyone in this room already knows but hasn't said." I turned to Linda, holding her gaze, refusing to let her look away. "Linda, can I ask you something?" She nodded slowly, wariness replacing her earlier confidence, the triumphant smile completely gone now. Why are you really here? And don't tell me it's because your sister died. I'm sorry for your loss, truly I am. Losing family is devastating, I know that. But that's not why you reached out to Robert 6 months ago. That's not why you've been meeting him for coffee and lunch and secret afternoons at that little cafe across town. That's not why you sent him a message saying you'd missed him for 30 years and weren't wasting any more time. Robert's face went from red to white in an instant, all the color draining away. How did you? His voice was barely a whisper, shocked and horrified. How did I know? I smiled, and it wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a woman who'd done her homework, who'd gathered her evidence, who'd prepared for this moment with the thoroughness of a prosecutor building a case. Because I'm his wife, Robert. Because I've known you for 27 years, and I know when something is off. Because I can read you like a book I've read 1,000 times, and suddenly there were pages missing, chapters that didn't make sense. Because I followed you last week and watched you hold her hand in that cafe, like you were teenagers falling in love. Because I went through your phone and saw months of messages, hundreds of them, building this emotional affair right under my nose. Because I'm not blind and I'm not stupid, even though you've apparently been treating me like I am both. Emma gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Claire's eyes were wide with shock, glistening with unshed tears. Linda started to stand, reaching for her purse, clearly desperate to escape, but I gestured for her to sit, my voice sharp with command. Oh no, please stay. We're all being honest now, aren't we? Isn't that what you wanted? To come here into my home and parade your history with my husband? To sit at my table and remind him of who he used to be before the responsibilities of real life wore him down? To offer him some fantasy of a do-over, a chance to recapture his youth, to correct what he's convinced himself was a mistake. My voice was rising now, all the careful control slipping away, months of suppressed pain and rage pouring out like water from a broken dam. Do you have any idea what it feels like to watch your husband light up for another woman, the way he used to light up for you? To realize that you've become invisible in your own marriage? To understand that the man you've loved and supported and stood by for nearly 3 decades is mentally and emotionally already gone, already living in some fantasy world where you don't exist. Tears were streaming down my face now, hot and angry, but I didn't wipe them away. Let them see. Let them see what their selfishness had done. Let them see the wreckage of their choices. Robert finally found his voice, standing up from his chair, his hands shaking. Evelyn, please, you're misunderstanding everything. Linda and I are just friends. Yes, we've been talking, but it's innocent. I swear to you, nothing has happened. We haven't, we're not. You're not what? I interrupted, my voice like ice. You're not having an affair? Maybe not physically, not yet, but emotionally? You've been having an emotional affair for 6 months, Robert. You've been giving her the parts of yourself that should have belonged to me. The attention, the affection, the intimacy. You've been building a relationship with her while letting ours crumble. What would you call that if not betrayal? He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. What could he say? How could he defend the indefensible? Emma stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor, her voice shaking with fury. Dad, tell me she's wrong. Tell me you haven't been cheating on Mom. Tell me this is all some horrible misunderstanding. But he couldn't meet Emma's eyes. He looked at his plate, at his hands, at the window, anywhere but at his daughters or at me. And in that moment of his cowardice, his inability to face what he'd done, I saw our entire marriage with brutal clarity. I had loved this man, truly deeply loved him. I'd given him my youth, my trust, my whole heart. I'd borne his children and built his home and stood by him through every failure and success. I'd sacrificed my own dreams to support his, had put my career on hold to raise our daughters, had bent and compromised and accommodated in the 1,000 ways women do to make marriages work. And he was throwing it all away for nostalgia. For the memory of who he'd been 30 years ago. For the fantasy that he could escape middle age and responsibility, and the weight of decades of real life. For the delusion that returning to an old love could somehow make him young again, could undo the years and the choices and the reality of who he'd become. Linda finally spoke, her voice small and defensive. Evelyn, I'm so sorry. I never meant. We didn't mean for this to happen. It just did. We fell in love again. I know that sounds ridiculous, I know how it looks, but it's true. We never stopped loving each other. Robert married you on the rebound from me. He was heartbroken when we divorced and you were there and it was comfortable. But what we had, what we have, it's real. It's been real for 30 years, even when we were apart. The audacity of it took my breath away. She was sitting at my table eating my food in my home and telling me that my marriage was a lie. That I was a consolation prize. That 27 years of my life meant nothing because she and Robert had some adolescent romance decades ago. I looked at Robert, waiting for him to defend me, to defend us, to tell her she was wrong. But he said nothing. He just stood there, trapped between his past and his present, unable to choose, unwilling to commit. And in that silence I found my answer. In that moment of his cowardice and indecision, everything became clear. I stood up slowly with great dignity, smoothing down my burgundy dress. "Get out," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the tears still streaming down my face. Linda grabbed her purse, clearly relieved to escape, but I held up my hand. "Not you. Not yet. Robert, get out of this house. Now." He stared at me, shocked, as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "What? Evelyn, this is my house too. This is our home. We need to talk about this. We need to discuss this rationally, figure out." I shook my head, cutting him off. "No. You gave up the right to talk when you brought your mistress into our home on Christmas Day. When you humiliated me in front of our daughters. When you chose to disrespect everything we built together. When you let her sit here and tell me that our marriage was meaningless. That I was just a placeholder until she decided she wanted you back. And you said nothing to defend me. So get out. Go stay with her. I'm sure she has room. I'm sure she's been planning for this moment for 6 months." Emma was crying now, silent tears running down her face. Claire was white as a sheet, trembling. Robert stood, his hands shaking, his face a mask of confusion and guilt. "Evelyn, please. Let's discuss this rationally. We can work through this. We can go to counseling. I'll end things with Linda." You'll what?" I laughed, and it was a bitter, broken sound. "You'll pretend this never happened? You'll expect me to forget that you were ready to throw away 27 years for a fantasy? That you brought her into our home and let her mock our marriage? That you've been lying to me for 6 months while building a relationship with another woman?" I walked closer to him, looking him directly in the eyes, wanting him to see exactly what he was losing. "I've never asked you for much, Robert. I've been patient and understanding and supportive through everything. But I will not be disrespected in my own home. I will not sit quietly while you and your ex-wife rewrite history to make me the villain or the fool. I will not allow my daughters to watch their father treat their mother like she's disposable. So I'm being perfectly rational when I tell you, you have 10 minutes to pack a bag and leave, or I'm calling the police and having you removed for trespassing." I've never seen a man move so fast. The weight of what he'd done, what he'd destroyed, finally seemed to hit him. He went upstairs and I could hear drawers opening, the sounds of hasty packing, the thud of items being thrown into a bag. Linda stood awkwardly, still holding her wine glass, looking like she wanted to disappear into the floor. I turned to her and my voice was ice, each word deliberate and cutting. "Did you really think he would choose you? That he would walk away from his daughters, his home, his entire life, for some fantasy of reliving your 20s? You're about to find out what it's like to have him, Linda. To have all of him, not just the fun parts, not just the romantic afternoons and nostalgic conversations. The snoring, the laziness, the way he leaves his socks on the floor and forgets anniversaries and complains about his back and falls asleep in front of the television. The reality instead of the romance. Congratulations. I hope it's everything you remembered." She opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. What could she say? She'd won, hadn't she? She'd gotten what she wanted. But looking at her face, I saw the dawning realization that maybe victory didn't look the way she'd imagined. Maybe the prize wasn't quite as shiny once you actually claimed it. Robert came downstairs with a duffel bag, his face ashen, his movements slow and defeated. He tried to approach me one more time, reaching out his hand. "Evelyn, please. I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. I just got confused. I made a terrible mistake." I stepped back, not letting him touch me. "Don't. Just go. And take her with you." He looked at Emma and Claire, tears in his eyes, his voice breaking. "Girls, I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. I love you both so much. This isn't what I intended. Emma turned her back on him, her shoulders rigid with anger and pain. She couldn't even look at him. Claire just cried, covering her face with her hands, her body shaking with sobs. And I felt something in my chest both break and heal simultaneously. The marriage was over, that much was clear. But in its ending, in this moment of terrible clarity, I was also freed. Freed from wondering. Freed from pretending. Freed from the slow death of being invisible to the person who was supposed to see me most clearly. They left together, Robert and Linda, walking out into the cold December night. I stood in the doorway and watched them get into her car, watched them drive away, the taillights disappearing into the darkness. Then I closed the door, locked it, and leaned against it, suddenly exhausted, all the adrenaline draining away and leaving only bone-deep weariness behind. After they left, the three of us sat in the living room in stunned silence. The Christmas tree lights twinkled mockingly, casting colored shadows across our faces. The remains of dinner sat cold on the table, our perfect Christmas meal abandoned, congealing on fine china. The house felt different now, emptier but also somehow lighter, as if a weight had been lifted even though the cost had been so high. Finally Emma spoke, her voice raw from crying. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. I can't believe Dad would do this. How could he do this to you? To us?" I pulled both my daughters close, wrapping my arms around them, holding them tight. They weren't little girls anymore, but they needed their mother, and I needed them. Neither did I, baby. Neither did I. Not until recently. We held each other and cried, the three of us, mourning the family we'd thought we were, grieving the father and husband we'd believed Robert to be. But even in that grief, I felt something else stirring. Relief. Clarity. The truth was out. The lies were exposed. The pretending was over. And I was still standing. Battered and heartbroken, yes, but standing. Breathing. Surviving. "What are we going to do?" Claire asked, her voice small and scared. I smoothed her hair back from her face, the way I had when she was little and afraid of monsters under the bed. "We're going to be okay," I said with more certainty than I felt. "We're going to get through this together. The three of us. We're strong and we have each other, and that's enough." The next few weeks were hell. Robert called constantly, his phone calls coming at all hours, begging to come home, insisting it had all been a terrible mistake. That he loved me, that he'd been confused, that Linda meant nothing, that he'd ended things with her the night he left. But I didn't believe him. And more importantly, I didn't care. The man I'd loved didn't exist anymore if he ever had. What I'd loved was an illusion. A projection of my own hopes and needs onto someone who wasn't capable of being that person. I'd made him into something he wasn't, and when reality intruded, when he showed me who he really was, I had to accept it. I filed for divorce immediately after New Year's. My lawyer was a sharp woman named Catherine Rodriguez, who came highly recommended by Emma's psychology professor. She looked at my documentation, the phone records I'd printed showing months of contact between Robert and Linda, the bank statements with the unexplained cash withdrawals, the testimony from Emma and Claire about what they'd witnessed on Christmas Day, and smiled grimly. "He's going to regret this," she said, her pen tapping against her legal pad. "We have adultery, we have witnesses, we have evidence of financial deception. In this state, that matters. He's going to pay, literally and figuratively." And she was right. See, Robert had forgotten something important in his midlife crisis fantasy. He'd forgotten to do the math, to think about consequences, to consider reality. We lived in a state with strict adultery laws, where infidelity could significantly impact divorce settlements. And more importantly, most of our assets were in my name. The house had been inherited from my parents, passed down to me when they died within months of each other 5 years ago. The savings account was largely funded by my salary. I'd always earned more than Robert, though he liked to pretend otherwise, liked to present himself as the primary breadwinner even though the numbers told a different story. Our retirement accounts were joint, but the investments my father had left me, the stock portfolio he'd built over decades, that was mine alone. Robert had assumed, in that way men often do, that he held all the power in our marriage. He'd assumed that I needed him more than he needed me, that I would accept his betrayal and be grateful he decided to stay, that I would forgive and forget because the alternative was too frightening. He was about to learn differently. He was about to discover that the quiet, accommodating wife he'd taken for granted was also the primary breadwinner, the property owner, the financial foundation of the life he'd been so eager to risk. The divorce was finalized in March, a surprisingly quick process given Catherine's efficiency and Robert's terrible legal position. I got the house, 3/4 of the shared assets, and a generous alimony payment that Robert choked on when he heard the amount. His lawyer tried to argue it was unfair, but the judge took one look at the evidence of his affair, at the testimony from our daughters, at the financial record showing my greater contribution to our marital assets, and ruled decisively in my favor. Robert got his pension, his car, and the reality check of a lifetime. He and Linda moved in together, to a small apartment in the cheaper part of town, far from the comfortable suburban neighborhood where we'd raised our girls. Emma and Claire refused to speak to him for months, their anger and disappointment creating a chasm he couldn't cross. They'd visit occasionally now, duty calls motivated more by guilt than desire, visits that left them drained and angry and frustrated. Because Linda, it turned out, wasn't the perfect romance he'd remembered. She was a real person with real flaws, real demands, real expectations. Living with her was nothing like those nostalgic memories or those romantic afternoons at the cafe. The last I heard from Claire, after one of her obligation visits, they fought constantly. Linda resented supporting him, resented that his alimony payments to me meant less money for them, resented that his daughters wouldn't accept her, resented that the fantasy hadn't matched the reality. He resented her neediness, her jealousy, her constant need for reassurance that he'd made the right choice. They were trapped together by the consequences of their choices, growing to hate each other with the same passion they'd once claimed was love. Do you think my decision was right or wrong? Tell me in the comments. Because what I did changed not just my life, but my daughter's understanding of what they should accept in relationships. Meanwhile, I was rebuilding piece by piece, day by day, learning who Evelyn was when she wasn't defined by being Robert's wife. I renovated the house, painting over memories, creating new spaces that were mine alone. The master bedroom, where Robert and I had slept for 27 years, became my sanctuary. I repainted it in soft grays and blues, bought new furniture, new bedding, erased every trace of him. The living room got a new arrangement, the furniture positioned to suit my preferences rather than his. I hung artwork I loved, things he'd always vetoed as too modern or too abstract. I planted a garden in the backyard, something I'd always wanted but never had time for when I was maintaining a marriage and raising children. I started going to a book club at the local library, and met women who became true friends, who supported me through the darkest days and celebrated with me as I found myself again. There was Patricia, a widow who'd lost her husband to cancer and understood grief. There was Denise, divorced for 10 years and thriving, who showed me that life after marriage could be full and joyful. There was younger women too, in their 30s and 40s, who looked at me with respect and curiosity, wanting to know how I'd found the courage to start over in my 50s. I enrolled in art classes at the community college, something I'd always wanted to do but never had time for. Turns out I had a talent for watercolors, for capturing light and shadow, for creating beauty out of nothing but water and pigment. My instructor said I had a natural eye for composition, and I felt a pride I hadn't experienced in years, pride in something I'd done, something that was mine alone. I traveled, taking trips I'd planned for someday, that had never come when I was accommodating Robert's preferences and schedule. I went to Italy and spent 2 weeks wandering through museums and eating pasta and drinking wine in sidewalk cafes. I went to Ireland and traced my family's roots, standing in the village where my great-grandparents had lived before emigrating. I went to Alaska and saw the northern lights, standing in the freezing darkness and watching colors dance across the sky, feeling small and significant all at once. I discovered that I liked living alone, that I was good company for myself, that I didn't need a man to validate my existence or give my life meaning. The house stayed clean. The bathroom counter wasn't cluttered with someone else's things. I could watch whatever I wanted on television, eat dinner at whatever time suited me, go to bed early or stay up late reading without considering anyone else's schedule or preferences. Solitude, I learned, wasn't the same as loneliness. Emma graduated with her master's degree and moved back home while she applied to doctoral programs in clinical psychology. Having her there was a gift, the two of us becoming closer than we'd ever been, talking late into the night about life and relationships and what it means to be strong. She told me I'd saved her, that watching me stand up for myself had taught her what self-respect looked like. "I'll never let a man treat me the way Dad treated you," she said one night. "You showed me that I deserve better. That it's never too late to demand better." Claire found a job she loved in marketing at a firm in the city, but came home every other weekend. She was dating someone, a kind man named Marcus who treated her like she hung the moon, who called when he said he would and showed up when he promised. She brought him home to meet me, nervous and hopeful, and I saw immediately that he was nothing like her father. This man knew how to value what he had. This man understood that love was a verb, not just a feeling. We became closer than we'd ever been, the three of us. Not just mother and daughters, but friends. Women who'd survived something terrible and come out stronger. They told me they were proud of me, that I'd showed them what real strength looked like, that I'd taught them never to accept less than they deserved. And I thought, if nothing else, if all those years with Robert resulted only in raising these two magnificent women and teaching them this one crucial lesson, then it was worth it. Every painful moment, every sacrifice, every compromise that wore away at my sense of self, it was worth it because I'd raised daughters who wouldn't make my mistakes, who knew their worth, who wouldn't lose themselves in loving someone else. About a year after the divorce, I ran into Robert at the grocery store. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I was picking up ingredients for a dinner party I was hosting, my book club friends coming over. He looked older, much older than just a year should have aged him. Diminished somehow, as if he'd shrunk in on himself. The spark I'd seen in that cafe with Linda was gone, replaced by a tired resignation that made him look like an old man. He tried to talk to me, pushing his cart close to mine, his voice hesitant. "Evelyn, how are you? You look good." I was polite but distant, the way you'd be with an acquaintance whose name you can't quite remember. "I'm well, Robert. Thank you." He wanted to say more, I could see it in his eyes, see him working up the courage to apologize again or explain again or ask for forgiveness again. But I didn't give him the opening. I didn't owe him anything, not my time, not my attention, not my emotional energy. Because the truth is, I'd forgiven him. Not for him, but for me. Holding on to anger was like drinking poison and expecting him to die. I'd let it go. I'd let him go. He was a chapter in my story, an important chapter that had shaped me and taught me and challenged me. But he wasn't the whole book. And I had so many pages left to write. As I walked away from him that day, pushing my cart toward the checkout, I felt lighter than I had in years. Free. The pain of betrayal had transformed into something else. Wisdom. Self-knowledge. Strength. I'd learned that I could survive anything. That I was enough all by myself. That happiness wasn't something another person could give or take away. It was something I created for myself, every single day, through my choices and my perspective and my determination to thrive. Do I regret confronting Robert and Linda that Christmas day? No, not for a second. Not even when I lie awake at 3 in the morning and the doubts creep in. Could I have handled it differently? Probably. I could have confronted him privately, spared the girls that painful scene, let him save face somehow. But I think in the end they needed to see it. Needed to understand that strength sometimes looks like standing up in the middle of your own destruction and refusing to be silent. Needed to learn that women don't have to accept betrayal with grace and quiet dignity. That we can rage. We can fight. We can demand better. And we can walk away with our heads held high, refusing to shrink ourselves or hide our pain to make other people more comfortable. Sometimes I wonder about Linda. What happened to the woman who thought she could reclaim her youth by stealing someone else's husband? I hear through Claire, who hears through a friend who knows Linda's niece, that she and Robert are still together, though unhappy. The romance died quickly once they had to deal with bills and chores and all the mundane realities of daily life. The fantasy couldn't survive reality. They've made their bed, as my mother would say. And I've made mine, and I sleep peacefully in it every night, alone but not lonely, content in a way I never was during those last years of my marriage, when I was sleeping beside someone but feeling utterly, completely isolated. The thing about betrayal is that it shows you the truth. The uncomfortable, painful truth about who people really are when you peel away the social masks and the comfortable lies we tell ourselves about our relationships. Robert wasn't the man I thought he was. Or maybe he was exactly that man and I just refused to see it, had constructed an illusion based on who I needed him to be rather than who he actually was. Either way, knowing the truth, however painful, is better than living a lie. Because lies keep you trapped in a false reality, in a performance of a life rather than an actual life. Truth sets you free, even when that freedom comes at a devastating cost. I'm 60 now, hard as that is to believe sometimes when I look in the mirror and see my mother's face looking back at me. 7 years have passed since that Christmas dinner, 7 years that feel both like a lifetime and like no time at all. My daughters are thriving both in careers they love, both in relationships with men who treat them as equals, as partners, as the remarkable women they are. Emma is finishing her doctorate, studying trauma and resilience, planning to open a practice helping women rebuild after divorce. Claire just got promoted to creative director, leading campaigns for major brands, her talent finally being recognized and rewarded. They learned from my experience, they tell me. They learned what red flags look like, what respect looks like, what real love should be. And watching them navigate their own lives with such wisdom and strength, seeing them build relationships based on mutual respect and genuine partnership, I feel a pride that eclipses any pain from the past. They're better than I was at their age. Smarter, stronger, more clear-eyed about what they deserve and what they won't tolerate. That's my legacy, I think. Not the marriage that failed, but the daughters who thrived. I've dated a little over the years, though I'm in no hurry to remarry. I like my independence too much now, like the freedom to make decisions based solely on what I want rather than what someone else needs or expects. But I've discovered that there are good men in the world, men who value character over fantasy, who understand that real love is built in the trenches of daily life, not in the glow of nostalgia. Men who show up, who tell the truth, who honor their commitments, who see you, really see you, not just the roles you play or the services you provide. I've been seeing someone for about 6 months now, a man named Thomas who's a retired architect. He's a widower, his wife having died 3 years ago after a long illness. He nursed her through with devotion that makes me respect him deeply. He's not looking to replace her any more than I'm looking to replace Robert. We're just two people who enjoy each other's company, who have coffee together and go to museums and take long walks and talk about everything and nothing. There's no pressure, no expectations, just the pleasure of connection without the need to define or label or force it into some predetermined shape. And if I never find a grand love again, if I spend the rest of my life solo or in this pleasant companionship with Thomas, that's okay too. More than okay. Because I have myself. And I'm excellent company. I know myself now in a way I never did when I was defining myself through my relationship with Robert, when my identity was so wrapped up in being someone's wife and someone's mother that I'd forgotten how to just be Evelyn. I know what I like, what I value, what I won't compromise on. I know my worth, and I won't accept less than I deserve ever again. Looking back on that December day 7 years ago, I see it now as a gift, wrapped in the ugliest paper imaginable, delivered at the worst possible time, but a gift nonetheless. It gave me clarity. It gave me courage. It showed me that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined, more resilient than I'd given myself credit for, that I could stand in the wreckage of my life and build something new and beautiful from the rubble, that endings are also beginnings if we're brave enough to see them that way, if we're willing to do the hard work of rebuilding ourselves from the ground up. If you're listening to this and you've been betrayed, if you felt that knife twist in your heart when someone you love chose someone else, if you've lain awake at night wondering what you did wrong or what you could have done differently or how you failed to be enough, know this: you will survive. More than survive, you will thrive if you choose to. The pain you feel right now, that crushing weight on your chest that makes it hard to breathe, that makes you wonder if you'll ever feel normal again, it won't last forever. Promise you that. It will transform. It will become wisdom. It will become strength. It will become the foundation of a new life you can't even imagine right now, but that's waiting for you on the other side of this grief. And one day, maybe years from now, you'll tell your story to someone who needs to hear it, someone who's standing where you're standing right now, and you'll realize that you've become the person you needed during your darkest hour. You'll realize that your pain wasn't wasted, that it taught you something essential about yourself, and about life, and about what really matters. You'll realize that you're stronger than you ever knew, braver than you believed possible, and worthy of so much more than you've been accepting. Did I do the right thing that Christmas day? I've asked myself that question 1,000 times, turning it over in my mind like a stone worn smooth by water. And the answer is always the same. I did the only thing I could do and still respect myself. I stood up for myself. I refused to be silent in the face of disrespect and betrayal. I demanded respect, even when it cost me everything I thought I wanted. And in losing it all, in watching my marriage crumble and my family change forever, I found myself. The real me. Not somebody's wife. Not defined by a relationship or a man's opinion of me. Just me, Evelyn, standing alone and discovering that alone doesn't mean lonely. It means free. It means whole. It means enough. So if you've made it this far in my story, if you've listened to every painful, beautiful, terrible moment, thank you. Thank you for bearing witness to my journey. Thank you for caring about the story of a woman who thought her life was over at 53 and discovered it was just beginning. If this story has touched you, if it's resonated with your own experience or given you courage to face your own truth, hit the like button so it can reach others who might need to hear it. And share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to choose between comfortable lies and painful truth? What did you choose? How did it change you? I want to hear your stories. We're all in this together. After all, navigating the complicated terrain of love and loss and the courage it takes to start over. And remember, it's never too late. Never too late to stand up for yourself. Never too late to demand better. Never too late to walk away from what's hurting you and toward what might heal you. Never too late to become who you were always meant to be. To discover the person you are when you're not bending yourself into shapes to please someone else. You are stronger than you know, braver than you believe, and worthy of so much more than scraps and lies and half-lived love. You deserve the whole thing, the real thing, the kind of love that sees you and values you and honors you. And if you can't find that with someone else, you can absolutely find it within yourself. If you like this story, hit the like button, and don't forget to subscribe to get more stories from me. Because I'm here, and I'm listening, and I see you. Every single one of you who's fighting to find themselves again after betrayal. Every single one who's standing in the ruins wondering if you'll ever be whole. You will. Promise you, you will. It won't look the way you expected, and it might take longer than you hope, but you will rebuild. You will heal. You will discover that you're capable of creating a life more authentic and fulfilling than the one you lost. Trust the process. Trust yourself. Trust that your pain has purpose and your story isn't over yet. With love and respect, Auntie Helen Stories.